Hollywood. A lot of people who look at this sign don't have a very high opinion of it. It's all sex and drugs and money and fame. But it's something more in our culture, and it might be telling us something more about ourselves than we're used to hearing. Hollywood is the cultural center of one of the most powerful storytelling technologies in history. Movies, television shows, and streaming services exert tremendous influence on American and even global culture. And there's probably a reason. And that reason is our brain. Antonio Damaso, a neuroscientist, says storytelling is something human brains do naturally and implicitly. It should be no surprise that it pervades the entire fabric of human societies and cultures. The more we study the brain, the more we see that our brains love story. Children as young as 2 years old can tell the difference between an interesting jumble of words or sentences or jokes and an actual story. And these brain scans from the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience illustrate how our brains love stories and light up when they hear them. Storytelling appears to be the fundamental way in which human beings package, remember, and express our ideas and experiences. A story is a cohesive, thematic interpretation of what's happened to us. We experience a series of events and then selectively weave together the important elements of those events into a story. Like when you ask someone, "Did you have a good day?" And they say yes, and you ask why, and they give you 2 reasons. But 2 reasons are enough to create a story even out of the 10,000 things that happened that day. Screenwriter Alicia Cohn says it this way: we think in story. It's hardwired into our brain. It's how we make strategic sense of the otherwise overwhelming world around us. And this ability to build stories out of very small pieces was noted by filmmaker Leo Kuleshov in the early 20th century. He discovered that if you took the same picture, in this case the same man, and put just one other picture beside him, people were able to come up with their brains with entirely stories that were true about this man, even though they were completely different stories when they were different stories next to the same picture of the same man. That ability led to what we now consider normal in movies, the montage, that we can just put a series of images together and our brains get it. That's why acting's so important, because the micro expressions in the face of an actor create a sense of realism in the story, or fail to create that kind of realism. That's why in Hollywood they talk about $1 million smile. It's an actor or actress that when you look at them, you just can't not smile, like a smile battle in high school. It's because the brain has this amazing ability called mirroring, that when we witness and experience somebody else doing something, we begin to experience it with them. You can see this in sports. Alex Morgan, it's perfectly normal when she's playing soccer that her brain is focused on soccer. But what's crazy is the people that are watching her, all of their brains begin to identify with it just the same as if they were playing the game. So when she scores the goal, they all go crazy, which explains UT football and a lot of other nutsy things. And that's how films work so powerfully. We watch a film. It seems perfectly normal that Luke Skywalker would be thinking lightsaber. But there's young boys watching the movie, and they're all, boom, suddenly brain mirroring. They're thinking lightsaber, and as soon as the movie's over, bang, they're out in the hall, fighting one another with their made-up lightsabers. It's even deeper than that. Paul Zak has discovered that by doing blood draws before and after the viewing of a narrative film, they found that character-driven stories consistently cause oxytocin synthesis. What does that mean? It means that you literally, as you begin to connect with the hero of a story, you begin to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It's when parents are with their newborn child, they're exerting oxytocin and the child's exerting oxytocin, they're bonding with one another. When you're petting your dog, you're getting flooded with oxytocin and they're getting flooded with oxytocin. When you're petting your cat, you're getting flooded with oxytocin, and they are not getting flooded with oxytocin. That probably explains an awful lot. And this bonding with the heroes in this, stories invite us to invest part of our personal identity in the hero for a short duration of the experience. In a sense, we become the hero for a while. We project ourselves into the hero's psyche and see the world through her eyes. Now, this is spoken by a famous writer, Christopher Vogler, and yet Vogler is expressing something that's being discovered over and over again in laboratory sciences around the world, that something called grounded cognition, where our brains literally experience things as if they're really happening to us, not only bonds us with these heroes, but actually causes us to live these stories in ways that continue to influence us long after we're out of the movie theater. And this has tremendous influence on us, where our identity and our heroic story of self begin to come together. We don't so much discover ourselves through story, so much as we make ourselves by subconsciously composing a continually evolving heroic story of self that forms much of our identity. Now, this is according to psychologist Dan McAdams in his book, The Stories We Live By. Now, that makes stories incredibly powerful. Whoever tells the best stories exerts the most powerful influence on the worldview of any culture. As Jonas Sachs has said in his book Story Wars, those who tell and live the best stories will rule the future. Now, that's good news for the church in the past. For centuries, the people of God told the best stories. 50% of the Old Testament is story, 60% of the New Testament is story, 80% of Jesus' public teaching was story, parable. Mark 34 says he didn't say anything to them without using a parable. And Chuck Slocum, the vice president of the Writers Guild of America West, has said, movies and television are today's equivalent to telling parables on a mountainside. If Jesus began his ministry today, I believe it's highly likely he'd become a filmmaker or a TV show creator. Well, that's what Robert Johnston is getting at in the book that we're starting to read together, Real Spirituality. That movies remain in the 21st century our primary storytelling medium for interpreting reality for us and acting as a type of cultural glue. And we need to pay attention because God has woven something into our brains that the world is paying attention to, and maybe we're not. Movies, television shows, and streaming services exert tremendous influence on American culture and beyond, a far greater influence than that of the church. Is it because Hollywood has intuited the remarkable capacity for storytelling and story living woven into the human brain by our Creator, while the modern church has failed to do so? That's what we're going to look at next, what this story structure is. But before you do, I want you to watch Paul Zach's video on neurochemistry, empathy, and narrative story, and decide for yourself.